Welcome everybody to our next video in our series on computer programming for mathematics. Today we will be talking about strings in Python. So probably you may be asking, what is a string? And that's a very good question considering that's exactly what we're talking about. And so the answer is a string is a sequence of characters. Now, even characters may be a little bit ambiguous. Back in the day when we talked about characters, we really meant Ascii characters. And Ascii was there to stand for the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. And so kind of the key there was everything was American, and so kind of our usual standard alphabet that we were used to dealing with. And so what happened, ASCII characters consisted of only 7 bits, and what this gave us was a maximum of 2 to the 8th minus 1, so 255 possible characters that we could have. Well, wanting to get the rest of the world involved and not just have it be strictly an American thing, today when we talk about characters, we could also mean a Unicode character. So Unicode characters come in multi-byte varieties, and so we can talk about the UTF-8. UTF-8 only uses 1 byte, and so for that, for all intents and purposes, that's our usual old ASCII characters from back in the day. UTF-16, which uses 2 bytes for each particular character, and UTF-32, which uses 4 bytes for each character. Now, pretty much everything that we'll be concentrating on will just be the usual ASCII characters. We may do some processing with the Unicode strings, and we may touch on that topic a little bit later on. But for now, everything that we'll be doing will just be the usual 8-bit 1-byte character strings. Okay, let's come over to idle and take a look and see what we have in experimenting with our strings. So the first thing that we want to look at is the use of single and double quotes. And what that actually means is that whenever we're typing a string into either the idle shell, Python interpreter, or in one of our scripts, that we are able to represent our string with, we could either enclose it in double quotes. So I am a string. So I've got a double quotes on one end, double quotes on the other end, and if I type that variable, I see that yes, it is a string. I could also use single quotes to do that. I am a string. So single quotes on each end. The interpreter will take that, and if I type that, yes, it is a string as well. Alright, let's see what's next. After single and double quotes, we've got the type function, so we've kind of introduced that a little bit. So you can, that's kind of our usual standard use of the type function. You've seen it in some of our other videos. Now the length function. So what do we mean by the length function? Suppose that I have a string, then I want to maybe know how long that string is, how many characters are actually in that string. And so let's do something that doesn't necessarily have as much white space so we can get a better idea. Let's do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, W, X, Y, and Z. And so now the length function is exactly what it sounds like. len of x, it's going to return me how many characters that I have in my string. Now the length function will also count any white space that I have in there. So if I come back to this original string, I am a string, If I do the length of x, it has 13 characters in it. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 characters. So 13 characters including the white space. Up next, we have the indexing a string. And so the indexing a string, if I am interested in a particular character in a string. So this is very similar to the indexing in our lists. It's very similar. It's exactly the same as the indexing for our lists. So if we want the first character, remember that the very first character is going to start at index 0. So let's go back. X is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Okay, so if that's our string, our very first character is going to be x sub 0. We know that the length of our string has 26 characters in it. And so what is the last character in our string? Well, x of 25. So if I'm starting at 0, my last character is going to be there at 25. If I want to talk about a sequence of characters in the middle, then if I want, say, the second, third, and fourth characters, then I want to say that I want to start. So if I want B on, so the second character is actually index 1, and then how far down do I want to go? If I want to go down to the 5th character, then I would just type, I want to go down to the 5th character. And that's going to return me the characters B, C, D, and E. So I get those 4 characters. Now, kind of alternatives with that, I can either put in positive values, I can put in negative values. What happens if I put in a negative value in a string? Well, if I put in -1, that's going to go from the end of the string. So from -1, it's going to give me the last character. If I do -2, it's going to give me the second to the last character, and so on and so on. If I wanted, say, from the 3rd character on to the end of the string, well, how could I represent that? Well, if I want the 3rd character, so A, B, C would be my 3rd character, that's going to be at index 2. And I want for the rest of the string, then I'm going to put in my my colon, but then I'm not going to put in a number for the end. So I'm going to tell Python to say I want everything else left over in the string. So if I do that, I get C all the way down to Z. If I wanted to go backwards, let's say that I wanted everything up to a particular point in the string. So if I want to go from the start, well, now I can leave the first entry blank. So I'll leave the first entry blank, do my colon, and say up to the fourth character in the string, and so I get A, B, C, D for those values. So that's kind of gives us a nice way of indexing in our strings. That's going to be also true for the lists, for the tuples, and for the dictionaries to a certain extent. But remember, the difference with the dictionaries is that our keys are lists in and of themselves. So let's see what we have next. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the colon and what that means. So this is going to give you, starting at the character at index 3 and going to the end, this is going to give you from the beginning up to index 2 on the string. String addition. So what does it mean with actual string addition? So we can add strings, and let's see what that might look like. Well, so start off with X's A, B, C, D, E, and how about Y being F, G, H, I, J. Okay, so those are our two strings. Now, addition works in an interesting way, because addition with strings is really just concatenation. So it's going to take the first string, second string, and just put them together to make a big brand new string that's just concatenation of the two strings that were before it, and which kind of gives you an interesting result. So being careful with the type that you're using, I could say that my x is the string 3.14. Oops, x is equal to the string, oh hey, stop, the string 3.14. Now if I type that, it is y. If I say 2.25, that's a string as well. If I do x plus y, now I get a concatenation of those strings and not the sum of those two characters. So even if my strings happen to look like floating point numbers, doesn't mean that addition is going to treat them like floating point numbers, because Python is still recognize them as strings, and so it's going to just concatenate the strings. Upper and lower functions. So one nice thing that we have with strings, let's say that we have x is equal to a lowercase and b uppercase. If I've got x dot lower, what happens? Now all of my cases, all of my characters in my string that were lowercase stay lowercase, but all the characters in my string that were uppercase stay uppercase or become lowercase. Same thing if I would do x dot upper. So one thing that I can apply to the string, now all of the characters that were lowercase become uppercase. Everything uppercase just stays uppercase. So I'm able to go back and forth between the cases, between characters. Split and lists. So if I want to take a string and divide it up, so x is equal to, let's make it the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Whoops, yeah, see, that's what happens whenever we mix a single quote and a double quote, that we get an error. Okay, so let's make them match, so both of them are single quotes. And so now we have the string. If we want to break up the string, then we can give it a character. That's what our function split is for. So if I would just say x dot split, and I don't say what I want to split it up by, so if I just do x dot split, then it's going to take every single one of those words that is listed there. Everywhere there's a white space, that's where it's going to break the string, and it's going to give me a list of substrings that are going to be separated by that white space. So these counts as a word, quicks is a word, brown is a word, separated by a white space. I could actually have it separate by any character or any particular substring that I want. Let's say that I want, let's take Mississippi, MISSISSIPPI. If I want to split that now based on, let's split it based on the character I. Then what happens? I get this list of things, that what happens before the first I. So what's the list of characters before the first I? It's an M. To the substring in between the first and second I gives me an SS. I get an SS. I get a PP, and then it's got a character I on the last one. Well, what happens after the last I? There's nothing after that, and so I'm seeing the empty string show up. And if I wanted to actually define the empty string, then I can do that with just str and open and close brackets. The join. So the join function lets me go through and kind of do the opposite. If split will let me take it apart, then join will let me put them together. So if I have, say, x dot join, what was x again? Okay, x was this. Let's say x is the word. Let's make it a list. So if I've got now x being a list, let's go back to what we had. So there, and if I split, let's say z being the split on that, z equals x dot split on the white space. Now I get a list of words. So I've got this list here. My z values are just my original words split up by the white space. And so they're individual words. If I wanted to put those back together, and so let's say maybe much to the chagrin of any public speaking teacher we may have had, let's say that y is going to be our string And so if we want to put those words back together, we can say, all right, y dot join the list of strings that we had. So our list of strings z, our list of strings z, we put those together, and now in between each word, instead of white space, we're getting the quick, brown, fox, jumped, and so on. And so you can see that we can take a substring or joining string that we want to put in there, and if we hand it a list, then it's just going to sandwich between all of those substrings the string that we're applying the join function to. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. If I wanted to go back to my original sequence, so if I did, how about not the empty string, but a string with just a single space, and then I did join z, what happens? Now I'm back to my original sequence with one single white space between all the words. So the split and join kind of lets us take strings apart, put strings together. All right, let's see what's next. Once the join function, conversion to and from floats and ints. Now, this is kind of a little bit of what we were alluding to up here. If we had two strings that were actually, let's say that I read them in from a file, they might be read in as strings, even though they're actually numbers. So the type of variable they are as strings. If I want to go back to the floating point values for those, then the conversion function is just float. So if I do float x, then that is my floating point number 2.4. Now if I just had, if I wanted the integer part of that, so if I only wanted the 2 from that value, if I try to do int on x, I'm going to get an invalid error. So I'm not able to convert straight from a string into an int if the string really has the format of a floating point number. I would have to do 2 conversions. So if I do the int, if of the float of the string, now it's perfectly fine with that. So it goes over to a float, then I hand the float to the integer, it knows what to do after that. If my string were just an integer, now if I type int, it returns me the integer 2, and everything is all well and good. So sometimes I may have to be a little bit careful with my conversions and how I'm reading things in, and kind of the format of the string before I do some of the conversions. If in our example, so we had x as our string 2.5 or 2.24, y 3.14, and if we add X and Y, of course, that's just going to give us concatenation because both of these are strings. But if I do the conversion, so if I do float X plus float Y, now it's going to convert them to floating point numbers, add them together, and that's what I get, plus a little bit of round off error. And so if that looks a little strange, go back and watch the video on our floating point numbers. That floating point numbers are kind of a strange entity in and of themselves. So I'll refer you back to that video for that. All right, what do we have next? Conversion to and from ints, mutability. So mutability has been one of those things that we discussed also in our video on lists, tuples, and dictionaries. That just to remember from that video that lists were mutable. We can change the value. Tuples were not mutable. Dictionaries were mutable. And if I try to do that with strings, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, if I try to do that with strings, I can index, say, the second element, but if I try to change that second element, let's say that I want that to be the string Z, now I get this error. And so that's the kind of the error that I get whenever the immutability error. So string object does not support item assignment. That's another fancy way of saying strings are going to be immutable objects, so I'm not able to do them. If I wanted to change what the character is, I'm going to have to make a copy of the string and change the character in the during the copy. So we'll see how to do that kind of later on in our other videos, but for now, just remember that strings are going to be immutable objects, tuples are going to be immutable objects, lists are mutable, dictionaries are mutable. And so let's say if we did want to replace a particular character, how is that going to work? Well, we can do that with the replace function. So what the replace function does, so I just type help x.replace. So what the replace function does, I can say what's the old character that I want, what do I want to replace that with, and how many counts of that character if I want to do that. Do I want to replace all of them? Do I want to replace the first one? How does that work? And so let's say that in our string we wanted to replace the character C with the character Z. And so how that might work, x.replace, and I want to replace the character C with the character Z, and so it's going to return me a brand new string. So now if I say that my original character or my original string X did not change, and so that string is as it is, it was immutable, I can't change the characters in that, and so what replace does is make a copy, hand me a new copy with the one character that I want replaced, actually replaced. And that's kind of how I can go and modify individual characters in a particular string. So I kind of hope you've enjoyed this little video on strings, indexing, putting things together, taking things apart. Hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have liked it, then like it down at the bottom, and I will see you guys next time.